Welcome back to the second part of the sword making tutorial. Now, in this part we're gonna learn everything about texturing. So, if you watched the last part, we've pretty much come to the point where you've imported your sword, you selected it to be a mesh, and you got the best resolution that you can get for it. So what you have to do after that is very simple. Click on your sword. Up here you see an icon called modify, click on that. Now in the modifier list, click on it and go down until you see something like unwrap UVW, which is the UV map which we are going to edit. The UV map is very important for every single sword because this map is what your sword's texture is based on. So without this map, the texture can get pretty funky and sometimes it will bug out, as some swords I have heard recently. So now if you opened up your UV unwrapping, then what you see here on the side is a selection type and the selection group toggle on or off, which means here you can select how do you want to select your swords or your components on your swords, such as points, lines, or a whole face, or whichever you want. And this one over here makes them select a whole group. So for example, if we go here, what you can see here, without this group selected, you will see that it only selected one little bit, like a little square. Now with this group enabled, if we click on it again, you will see that it selects the whole thing, the whole line, and not just one little part of it. Now knowing that, here we have an UV editor button which we will click on and open up the UV editor. Now this part is probably the most boring and hardest part of all of it. Now why is this the hardest and most boring part? Is because what you see here is the sword's texture. Scrolling all the way out, you can see that everything is here. If we drag over everything, you will see that the whole sword is selected. And this isn't really beautiful, but it's easy to use. Now what you want to generally do is click on freeform gizmo under the edit tab. What that does, it allows you to control these texture, as I would call them, these texture groups. You could control them freely with all the tools that you have. You can resize them, you can basically rotate them, and you can move them around or whatever you want. Now all this thing, what you see here, has to be sorted and then later on has to be put into a little box, which is gonna be shown in a second. There we go, let's just move that away. So here in this small little corner you see a box which is the size of around 1000 by 1000 pixels, and this is the box that you have to put everything in. So whatever you see here in this screen, in the UV editing screen, has to go in this box. So knowing that you can move every single part and you can do whatever you want with them, another thing that you have to know is it has the same selecting elements here as well. So you might want to select the grouping toggle, so that you will select a whole group and not just one single part of it. As you can see now, I selected the whole face of the sword. Now what I can do with this is I can just move the whole thing. If I don't have this selected, I will just select one single part of it, like one triangle. So knowing all of these, that you can rotate it around with by dragging your mouse to any side of it. You can resize it by dragging your mouse to the corner of it, and you can move it around by having your mouse inside the box anywhere. Knowing these, we can now start and actually move the sword itself and resize every single texture into that box. Another thing good to know is that how I do this is I select the things on the sword. I select every single face on the sword and not in the editor. I just move and edit them. So for example, if I want to select this part in the editor, it will be quite, let's say not that part. Let's see this part. In the editor, I would never see this part unless I drag everything away until I find that. But like this, you can click on the sword and you can just see where it is in the editor, and you can move these parts individually like that. This makes it a lot easier to group swords together. I mean faces. It's easier to group faces together, and this way it will make your whole UV editing experience a bit easier. Now, you have to take in mind what I recommend you. Having the longest part of the sword should always fit from one end of the box, like that end, until there. It always should go all the way from one end to the other to ensure that you get the best resolution texture that you can get on these big parts. Because if you're making swords, it will always have some big parts like these. For example, this is the whole back part of the axe that I am going to upload. So you have to take that in account, and that way, if you resize everything, you can pretty much sort everything out into groups, and you can then start putting them into the box. So I'll go back to you when we are done with organizing it. Another thing that you might want to know is you can select multiple things by clicking the Control button, and by clicking I mean pressing. So if you hold down Control, you can select multiple objects. If you hold down Alt, you can deselect objects or faces, because we're working with faces and triangles. Another thing that you might want to know is by holding down Control, you can resize and rotate objects by a fixed ratio, which means if I hold down Control and try increasing the size, as you can see, the size ratio will stay the same, the height and length ratio. And for the last thing, what I'd like to say is that it's good to know that I put every single texture part of my object into the biggest part that is related to the group. For example, for this part of the axe, this middle part over here is the biggest thing that you can see, like that. So what I like to do is just put this as the biggest object and size everything else to the same size as this is. So that way, when it comes to actually putting on a texture for it, it will have a higher all of these parts will have a higher quality, which is not really the best idea, but it's good if you have some sizing issues like I had, that these parts were way too small, so I resized them a little bit, and that's really handy. So as you can see, I have grouped up everything which is part of this basic bit of the sword, and this is what I'm going to do with every other part as well. So this way I can get a better idea of what should contain what texture. Alright, so now I have organized every single bit into a group, and as you can see, if I select one major group, you will see that it's broken down into pieces, each single group containing each part of the actual sword, or in this case the axe. So another thing that you want to learn if you're having problems with length, such as this one, like let's say something is way too long to fit in somewhere, then what you can do is unselect your group tool and then select your line or edge tool, and here click on one edge, right click on it and select break. Now what break will do is break these two objects or two faces from each other by that line. So what you can do with this is, for example, break down from before, this was a complete one-sided texture, and what I did, I got the lines from here, from this end, from that end over there. As you can see, if I select it now, it still selects it as one group, but I broke that line down, and so now it's split into three groups and it's much easier to manage. So knowing all of this, hopefully you have managed to organize your UV map as well. And now what's left to do is to put everything in that small little box. Now, as said before, you might want to make sure that these longer parts do fit in the whole thing, because it is pretty important to get the whole thing as like these big things as big as possible. You don't want to get like these things small, because that would be very inconvenient. So knowing this, I'll be back when I put everything in that small little box. Alright, now it's done. So now we can move on to the next part, which is actually saving the UV file. So we will click on save it as the UV file, and then click on tools, and here click on render UV template. Leave it at 1024 by 1024 and everything as you can see on the screen, and then click on render UV template. Now what you get here is a black screen and everything on it is part of your texture. Now here what you want to do is click on this icon, which will save it as an image, and here you will want to save it as something, for example that, and you want to save it as a PNG. Everything else is what you see on the screen, doesn't really change from the default, so there's nothing to worry about. So now you click save, you select RGB 48-bit, and you select the alpha channel. That's important. So now you click OK, and that's it. Now it's saved. Now you can click on the exit, and here as well, and here as well. Now you have your textures arranged, you can actually start doing the texturing for it. Now comes the part where you actually can go on different paths and you can choose whichever way you want, because now comes the part where you actually make the texture for your sword, where you actually draw it. So what you want to do is get paint.net, Adobe Photoshop, and GIMP, whichever you want. You don't have to get all three of them. You don't even have to get any of them. If you want to use the old Microsoft Paint, it doesn't matter, because they work almost on the same concept. Now, there's multiple ways on getting a texture for your sword. First way is going on the internet, and then on Google you write in textures and whatever you want. whichever textures you want, you can get them from Google. This is the easiest way, and if you have no clue on how to do textures, this is how you should start off. For example, let's say we want a metal texture. You can just Google it up, and here you see loads of textures. All of them are pretty much usable. Some of them are not free, and some of them are not given out as a free product, so that means you cannot reuse them. So before you use any of these up, I recommend you checking on their website or somewhere if it's actually licensed, or in other words, if it's actually allowed to use in your project. So this is the easiest way. Now, there is a little bit harder way, which involves GIMP. Now, what makes this harder is that you actually have to open it up. And that's it. Yes, that's pretty much it. That's why it is harder. Now, you can use GIMP, for example, if you want to make your own textures as well. Now, why I said GIMP first is because GIMP comes with a load of textures on its own already. So if you want to have any textures on ready which are usable for commercial use, then here it is. You can have all kinds of textures which are here on this side. By selecting this second tab, you will be brought up to the textures screen, and here you can select all the default textures that it contains. You can get more textures in some way that I have no clue of, but there is a way to get more textures for this as well. If you check on their website, I am pretty sure you will find some tutorials on how to get more textures or how to design your own. I am not going in depth on designing textures because that takes some time, and you can find every single tutorial I know as well on the internet. Now, the other program is paint.net. Now, this is an even harder option because paint.net, basically any kind of texture you want to make in paint.net, you have to download different sorts of add-ons for it, such as an add-on to make scratches on a texture, an add-on to filter out a texture to make it look like it has some noise on it, and stuff like that. It's not easy, but this is a way to make your own textures, and I use this to make my own textures. You can find tutorials on, for example, if you write in on Google, paint.net texture tutorials. Here you go. Already, here is the forums, and you can actually have any texture you want by following these instructions. For example, the first one. Now, what this does is make bricks. As you can see, it's very easy. It works very well. So now, as you see, you have a brick texture if you follow these tutorials on their website. I will put on a link in the description box, and you will see how you can make your own textures as well. I am not going in depth because I learned from these websites as well, and this is what I can tell you, to check out these websites and read over them. It would take a lot of time to show everything off, so I will link this in the description, and you will be able to learn what I know and how to make textures as well. It's very easy if you get the hang of it. Now, the third program, that is the most common program for making textures and all kinds of images, is Adobe Photoshop. I use Adobe in general in getting my textures, and that is what you should use as well if you want to take this seriously. because this has absolutely every single feature that you can ever imagine in a software that's for image editing. Now, I don't mainly use this for making textures, but for the actual image editing, because it feels much easier after I get the hang of it. So I am going to show you the things I do with Photoshop. So what you want to do is basically open up your textures wherever you saved it. So for me, it's this one. And now, as you can see, here is your texture file. Now it looks a bit weird. It's okay. We're gonna make a new layer by pressing Ctrl Shift N and just name it whatever. This is going to be your background temporarily, so you can see something. It's not a big deal. All you need this for is to actually make out something from the image. And here it is. Here's the image. Now what we will do is we will make everything here black. So what we will do, first of all, we will click on the magic wand and click here to select everything that's outside of these green lines. Now there's nothing to, I would say you should put your tolerance on 0, because there's nothing to be scared of. If you're scared of that it will go inside the green lines or it's gonna miss anything, because the green lines are just a straight, no color fading, or whatever you would call that. It has no fading at all. It doesn't fade away. It doesn't become transparent. It's just a straight, hard green line, or arc, as you can say. So after we click this, we selected everything that's outside of these objects. And now what we want to do is we want to color this, let's say something like that. So let's color it. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is select, come here under the tabs, select the select tab and click on inverse. Now what inverse does is actually selects everything that wasn't selected before and unselects everything that was. So it actually goes the other way around. So it selects for us every single bit and we don't have to select these on our own. And now what I will do is click on select again, click on modify, and then click on expand. Now why I do this is because I don't want my textures to be too sharp, because I might miss out some pixels for whatever reason, so I might just make it a bit bigger. So we're going to expand it by 1 pixel. There we go. Now that it's expanded by 1 pixel, you can't really see the difference unless you close up. There you go. So now you're not going to miss absolutely anything at all. And what we're going to do is just basically color everything here black, because we don't want to see all these green and white lines. So we're gonna color everything black. There we go. Now we can remove this layer from over here. And there you have it. Now what you want to do, because these are basically black objects, they have no sort of fading away, you can use the magic wand tool with 0 tolerance to select exactly every single object. So this is the easiest way of selecting something. And what I would recommend you doing is, if you want to add a texture on any single of these, is clicking on something, pressing delete. Now as you can see, there is nothing in the background, it's empty. And then create a new layer with Ctrl Shift N, create a new layer, drag it under it, and here you can add whatever you want. And as you can see, if I click on coloring, I can just color this up, and I could just color anything up here. I could just click anywhere, nothing will happen because the layer is under that one, so it's actually going to show only what's empty on this layer. So knowing this, I wish you good luck in making your textures or collecting your textures from the internet. and adding a texture to every single black part that you made up. This is why we grouped everything, so it's going to be a bit easier, because now we know which group should get what sort of textures, so it's going to be much easier now. So I'll see you when I have the textures. Another thing that you can do is actually merge layers. Why this is good is if you make something that's a bit too big, for example, let's say you get a texture that's exactly 1000 by 1000 pixels and it's too big to fit it in like this small place, and then you get another texture that's too big, and then what you will see is that one texture overlaps the other one. So what you will see is something like this. So as you can see, one texture will overlap the other one. And why merge layer is good is because you can merge these two textures, for example, these two parts. So when I select both of them by holding down Control and I click on merge layers, what it does, it makes it one layer. So now everything that's under it will not go above the things that you made. This way it makes it much easier to not go over your old textures with some new textures that you are making. Alright, at any moment that you want to actually test your texture out on your sword, what you can do is just give it a save. So let's save it as something, for example, our old one. Let's save it. Okay, so anytime you want to test it, go into your 3ds Max, select, press M, it will bring up the material editor, select the first material, then here click on the maps, then check the diffuse color, and beside it on none, click on it. Now it will bring up you a list. Here click on bitmap, click OK, then select your texture wherever you've put it. So let's say that one. Now here in this drop down menu, select default, then over here select this show shaded material in viewport. Now what you can do is just drag this material over your sword. Now as you can see, you can close this, and as you can see, your sword has now a material. What you can do now is click on this icon, and then it will remove the UV mapping things. So now you can see the sword with the texture on. So now it will be much easier for you to actually see the texture live on the sword. Alright, now that we have our texture, we can move on to the next step. We will give it a quick check in 3ds Max, and as you can see, it looks pretty nice. Everything looks okay. So now what we will do is actually make the second file, which is the normal map. Now this first one only controls the basic, as I would call it, coloring of how the sword is actually colored. Now what we will do is make the file that controls the depth of the sword. What that means that if you, for example, look the sword from a closer point, then as you move along, you will see that the light does actually reflect the parts that are actually more in depth. You will see as you test things out with this, and what we will use for this is the program Shader Map. Now what we will do with Shader Map is open it up. Now if you don't have the licensed version as I do, then what you can do is still use this as I do, just in a bit different ways. So what you will do is click on this icon, you will open up a color texture. There is the little button saying color texture, and now what you will do is go into your material, click on it to load up your material. Now here it made some stuff for it, already generated every file that you need. So as you can see, you can get a really nice view of it and how it looks like, and this is what I am talking about. If we take a look around here and we go look at this from a much closer angle, you can see that it has bumps on it, and this is what this controls basically. So what we will do here is double click on this one, and here is the normal map for it. So this is how it controls everything. Now this may look easy to draw yourself, and if you think so, then you're very wrong, because it's quite hard to draw this to yourself. And what you can do here is, if you don't have the licensed version, then what you can do is you can make screenshots of it. So you can just make it large, close up, and make a screenshot of it. Now I think this is quite big enough already to make a 1000 by 1000 screenshot if your screen is 1900 by 1000 resolution. So if you have the licensed version, just click on the save button right over there, then select the folder where you want to save it, name it something. Let's name it, there we go, the metal normal map, and save it as a PNG. Now why PNG? Why am I saving most of my files as PNG? Is because the alpha channel, which controls how transparent something is, does actually control how much something is reflecting things. So that means it's going to control basically reflectiveness as well, and you do not want that. So after we've saved our file, I just clicked on sharpen to make sure it's sharper than usual. You can change the intensity, and you can reverse the whole thing, and you can do stuff like that. It doesn't really matter, you just need one of these files. Now when you got this file, you can exit this, and you can go back into Photoshop, open it up, and we will make this not shiny as the sun, because if you leave it like this, it will just be, your whole sword will be white, and you don't want that. You don't want your sword to be white. So what we will do right now is go on opacity and change everything down to 5%. There we go. Now you think that this is all messed up right now, but it works perfectly. So now what we will do is go into saving again. So now we will save it as a PNG if I can find it, because it's interesting. Okay, PNG, and let's save it. So there we go. That's the normal map done. And that's how easy it was. So for the next bit, we're going to create the exponent map, which controls shininess as well, and it controls color changing. So with the exponent map, what you can do is you can make things change color, or you can make things not so shiny, or you can make things have a different sort of shininess, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. So what we will do is I will open up a normal map from before, which I used here. So let's see, one of the normal maps over here, which I used over here. There we go. So this is how exponent map, this is how an exponent map looks like, and all these colors are pretty interesting. So yeah. Basically, this color, there we go, and we need this color. There we go. So we already have that color. Now, usually how you would go around is go into channel and change red channel and green channel and blue channel and stuff like that. We don't really care about those things. So what we will do is just select all of that. I have put all the 3 colors that I need on the swatch. So what these colors do, this lime green does nothing to your texture. This very light cyan blue makes it change color, and this dark green makes it a bit more reflective and a bit more shiny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select out the edges, then I'm going to go into inverse. Now everything's selected. Now I'm going to select out what I don't want to change. So that means I am going to select out everything. So I'm going to select the rectangular, select marking tool, whatever, and go into the third icon, which will subtract from the selections. So what I don't want to change color, I will get unselected. So for now, I'm going to select only the things that I want to change color. There we go. So only the things that I want to change color. So give me a little moment. Let's select everything. So now here I'm going to select these parts. There we go. Select that. Okay, and as you can see, it did a bit of a mess up here. So what we will do is go into, as you can see, it didn't select everything, so we will go into modify, expand by 1 pixel, and now it selected everything. And now we will unselect these 1 pixel wide parts that we don't want selected. So it's very simple, as you can see. And now what we will do is we will color everything what we want into this blue. There we go. So we will make everything change color. It doesn't need a texture. That's the good thing about it. So it just needs like a color. So we'll leave that at that color. Now what we will do is we will make some bits now shiny. So what we will do is we will unselect everything, select everything back, and we might as well make everything green right now. So there we go, everything over here green. So now what we will do, we want to make some parts here shiny. And by some parts I mean the top parts. So what I will do right now is I will give an inverse again. So select inverse, and now what I will do is make this a bit easier for myself. I will unselect like that bit over there, select that, and then I will just color this bit to that green. That's it. Now what I will do is to make sure that everything is selected again. So I'm going to expand it by 1 pixel and going to reselect, recolor everything. And now what we can do is basically go into here, select this, select only the edge, and now we can give it an invert. Where is it? Select, there we go, inverse, and everything that we have already colored, we will unselect those. So let's unselect everything that we have colored already, which is like these stuff over here, and these stuff, these parts as well. Oh god, let's not unselect that. These parts over here. There we go. And now what we will do is we will make the same color everything as well. So yeah, we don't need these at all, so we will make them green as well. So now what will happen is that whatever is blue will become pretty much a... So whatever is blue will change colors, whatever is dark green will shine, and whatever is lime green will not shine at all and will have no effect whatsoever on it. So yeah, now I'm just making sure that these things are not colored, because we don't want that to happen. We don't want these parts to shine even a little bit, so we will just get that and we will just remove those little lines from there. This usually doesn't happen if you select everything correctly, but seems like I didn't select everything correctly, so it did happen. And that's it. That's your exponent map. So what you will do now is click on save, and you can save it as a PNG and just save it as exponent map. There we have it. And that's it. Now you can close this. And now you can, let's see, open up that one. And now you can see here is the normal texture. Oops, let's put it back. There we go. Here is the normal texture. Here is the normal map for the texture. And here is the exponent texture of the diffuse map, which is the normal texture. And that's it. And that's all your basic textures done. So, alright, now that we have everything, what you have to do now is the final texture, which is the tracer and the tracer dissolve. Now, the tracer is what you see that goes around the sword when you swing it, or when you swing it from left to right and everywhere. You know what's the tracer, you have to know it. So, what you have to do is make a new image that's 1024 pixels by 256 pixels, and this is it. Here is your basic tracer. Now you want to make this black, so you're going to make this black, and now you can start doing whatever you want. The tracer itself is a grayscale image, which means it can go from white down to dark black until you reach black. Now the brighter the color, the more visible it will be in game. So what I did in my tracers is make everything full bright, because if it's not full bright, it's barely visible, and I don't really recommend trying to mess around with shades and stuff like that, like to make it, you know, a bit darker. I don't really recommend that, because you can test these stuff, but it won't really be visible. Now, before we go in and make a tracer, I just have to say that whatever color you put into here, it will color the tracer in game as well. So it should be only a grayscale image, but if you put in some sort of color, it will actually colorize it, and in the game, whatever you do in game, it will have an interesting effect as well. It will pretty much, you can make a rainbow. So even though your color, let's say red, you can make something like this, you know, happen like a rainbow, and suddenly you are facing a rainbow, and your tracer will be a rainbow color even though you're only red. So yeah, I'll be back when I'm done with my, and that's it pretty much. There we go. There's our tracer as well. It's fairly simple, so now we'll give it a save as a PNG over to here. There we go. Let's see. There we go. And now for the dissolve. What the dissolve does is basically controls on how your tracer disappears after its lifetime has expanded. What I do is I use a completely white, basically a completely white image for that, which means all I'm doing is doing that, and that's all I'm using for it, because I want my tracers usually to stay as much as possible, and that's how I want to do it. That's it. So that's it for the tracers, and that's it for the video as well. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to put all of this together and how to make one nice sword from this. One more note before I leave is your tracer should always have a pure white line on the bottom. Now, what that does is basically makes the tracer show where the sword does actually hit. This bottom part is basically the end of the sword, so imagine it like this. Let's see, image rotation, like that. So whenever you're hit, that's the white part where it is going to hit. This bottom part is where your sword does actually initiate the tracer from, and this is the final part of the tracer, so it's no biggie at all.